When a man reaches that moment when every familiar voice grows silent, when every hand he trusted slips away, when every promise made to him collapses under the weight of reality, something sacred happens. Not something comfortable, not something that makes sense at first, but something holy. Because the place where human support ends is the place where divine support begins. And if someone listening to me right now feels abandoned, forgotten, betrayed, overlooked, or simply exhausted by people, you need to stay with me until the end of this message. Because what you are calling isolation, God is calling invitation. Let me tell you why you must listen closely. Some breakthroughs only come when God becomes your only option. And some of you are days, maybe hours, away from discovering a strength, a peace, a clarity you never knew was possible. Stay with me, because this message may redefine the hardest season of your life. There comes a time when God allows a man to walk through a valley where every relationship, every friendship, every support system is stripped away, not to punish him, not to crush him, but to pull him into a place where the noise stops long enough for God's voice to finally be heard. You see, when a man is everyone, he often doesn't hear God at all. But when a man has no one but God, he hears him more clearly than ever. In the quiet moments of loneliness, God whispers truths that could never be heard in the chaos of crowds. Truths about who you are, truths about who he is, truths about the future he is preparing for you. And if it takes losing people to gain that clarity, then perhaps what feels like a loss is actually a divine appointment. Maybe God removed certain people because he knew they were standing in the way of your destiny. Maybe he closed certain doors because they led to places smaller than his plans for you. Maybe he allowed certain hearts to turn cold so yours could turn fully toward him. Sometimes God must let everything fall apart so you finally discover the one who holds everything together. There is something powerful about the man who hits rock bottom but realizes that God is the rock at the bottom. That man becomes unshakable. That man becomes steady. That man becomes dangerous to the kingdom of darkness because he no longer depends on applause, validation, or approval from anyone. God does not build warriors in crowds. He builds warriors in caves. He trains champions in loneliness. He shapes leaders in silence. And when you emerge from that season, when you rise from that valley, people will see strength in you they cannot explain. They will ask how you survived, what broke others. They will wonder how you kept going when everyone else walked away. And you will smile not because you had support, but because you learned the beauty of standing with God when no one stood with you. So if you feel alone right now, hear this truth. You are not abandoned. You are being equipped. If you feel isolated, God is not hiding from you. He is drawing you closer. If you feel empty, God is clearing space for something greater. And the day will come when you will thank him, not for the people who stayed in your life, but for the ones who left, because their absence made room for his presence. When a man has no one but God, he discovers that God is more than enough. When I say that loneliness is not the end, but the beginning of revelation, I want you to hear me with your heart, not just your ears. Because some of you are walking through a silence so heavy you can feel it pressing against your chest. You lie awake at night wondering why the people you trusted drifted away, why the ones you poured your life into suddenly turned their backs, why the relationships you built with sincerity now feel like distant echoes. And you've told yourself, this must be the end of something. But listen carefully. What feels like an ending may actually be the doorway to the greatest revelation of your life. I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast wilderness with no one beside you, no voices behind you, no footsteps ahead of you. At first, the emptiness terrifies you. It feels like punishment. It feels like failure, but then something happens. You begin to hear sounds you've never heard before. A whisper in the wind, a stirring in the trees, a faint voice calling your name. Not the voice of people, not the voice of your past, but the voice of God breaking through because every other voice finally got quiet. You see, we spend so much of our lives surrounded by noise, opinions, expectations, demands. And as long as those voices stay loud, God will not compete with them. He will not shout over them. Instead, He waits. He waits for the moment when you feel like everything has been stripped away so He can reveal Himself in a way you could never have received before. Loneliness is not God turning away from you. It's God clearing the room so you can finally recognize Him. There are times when God allows you to be isolated because there is a revelation so precious, so life-shifting, so destiny-defining that it cannot be delivered in a crowded place. Some truths are too sacred to be spoken in noise. Some callings are too weighty to be heard through distractions. And some assignments can only be understood when it's just you and God standing in the quiet. And hear me, loneliness is not a sign of weakness. It's often the early sign of calling. The moment before God announces a new chapter, He often silences the old one. The moment before He brings clarity, He removes confusion. The moment before He reveals His purpose, He removes the people who were clouding your vision. You may feel like people have walked out on you. But what if I told you God walked you away from them? What if I told you their absence is the very thing that is positioning you for the revelation that will define the rest of your life? What if the silence you fear is the space where God is preparing to speak the loudest? Stay with me now, because loneliness is not an empty place, it's a sacred place. It's the space where God begins to whisper who you really are. It's the classroom where He teaches you things no mentor ever taught you. It's the mountain where He reveals things no friend could ever explain to you. It's the quiet valley where He strengthens you for what is coming next. So if you're in that lonely place right now, don't assume it's the end. Don't rush out of it. Don't despise it. Lean into it, because the God who seems silent is about to speak. The God who seems distant is drawing you closer. The God who seems hidden is preparing to reveal something that will make sense of everything you've been walking through. Loneliness is not the end. It's the beginning of revelation. When I tell you that God removes people to reveal His presence more clearly, I'm not giving you a poetic line. I'm giving you a spiritual reality that many never understand until they're forced to live it. Some of you listening right now are confused, hurt, even heartbroken, because people you depended on suddenly disappeared. They stopped calling, they stopped showing up, they stopped caring, and you've been asking yourself, what did I do wrong? But I want you to lean in, because this truth might change everything you think about loss and separation. There are moments in life when God Himself begins to shift relationships, not because you're unworthy of them, but because your destiny is too big for them. Some people were meant to walk with you for a season, but not into your purpose. Some were meant to comfort your past, but not accompany your future. And when you cling to what God is trying to remove, you delay what God is trying to reveal. You may think people walked away because they lost interest, but sometimes God pulled them out because their presence was blocking your vision of Him. You were leaning on their strength instead of His. You were depending on their words instead of His voice. And as long as you had them to run to, you didn't feel the need to run to Him. Hear this: God loves you too much to let you depend on anyone more than Him. So when God starts removing people, when friendships fade, when relationships shift, when familiar faces disappear, it may not be rejection at all. It may be divine protection. It may be heaven clearing your path, rearranging your environment, and creating a space where His presence can finally be experienced without competition. Let me speak directly to your heart. Some people were blocking a revelation of God you desperately needed. As long as they stood between you and His voice, you would never hear Him clearly. As long as their opinions shaped your decisions, you would never discover His plans. And as long as their approval mattered more than His, your identity remained fragile. But when God removes people, everything changes. Suddenly, the silence you feared becomes the very place where God begins to whisper. Suddenly, the emptiness around you becomes the space where His presence fills you. Suddenly, The absence of people becomes the opportunity for the presence of God to become real, tangible, intimate, undeniable. And I want you to notice something God never removes without replacing. But he does not replace people with more people. He replaces them with himself first. He draws near in a way you may never have experienced while you were surrounded by noise. He steps into the loneliness, not as a distant observer, but as a present personal father who wants you to know him, not through sermons, not through someone else's words, but through encounter. Sometimes God has to strip away your support so you can finally see the one who has been supporting you all along. So if people have left your life recently, don't rush to fill the space with substitutes. Don't chase what God has intentionally removed. Instead, pay attention, because the emptiness is not punishment, it's preparation. The absence is not abandonment, it's alignment. What feels like loss is actually God positioning you for a clearer revelation of his presence, his purpose, and his power in your life. God removes so he can reveal, and what he reveals in that sacred silence may be the very thing that carries you into the calling he prepared for you. And it's in that very moment when God removes the familiar voices and reveals his presence in a deeper way that isolation becomes more than a place of emptiness. It becomes the place where your strength is rebuilt. Because once God has your full attention, he begins a work in you that could never have happened while you were surrounded by people who kept rescuing you, comforting you, or distracting you from the growth he intended. Let me say this clearly: God does not waste isolation. He uses it like a craftsman uses fire, not to destroy, but to refine. There are seasons when God leads a man into solitude because he intends to rebuild him from the ground up, not the version others think he should be, not the version the world tells him to be, but the version heaven wrote before he was even born. And that kind of rebuilding requires quietness, stillness, and a separation from everything that once weakened him. Maybe you didn't notice it, but while you were surrounded by certain people, your strength was leaking. You lived on their encouragement instead of God's word. You survived on their approval instead of God's affirmation. You were strong as long as they were around and weak the moment they weren't. And God said, "No more. I want to rebuild you into someone who stands firm whether people stand with you or not." Isolation is the workshop where God constructs a stronger version of you. And I know it doesn't feel like that at first. It feels harsh. It feels lonely. It feels unfair. You walk into that quiet room thinking you've been abandoned, but God brings you there thinking it's time to rebuild what life has broken in you. Think of every biblical figure God ever used powerfully: Moses, David, Elijah, Paul. Before they ever stood in victory, they stood alone. Before they ever led nations, they faced silence. Before they ever spoke with authority, they listened in isolation. And it was in that solitude that their strength was born, not in applause, not in recognition, not in community, but in quiet conversations with God that reshaped their character, their courage, their endurance. This season you're walking through may be the same kind of season. A season where God tears down old fears so he can build boldness, where he dismantles insecurity so he can build confidence, where he removes doubt so he can build faith, where he breaks your dependency on people so he can build a dependency on him alone. Hear me. Rebuilding takes time. It takes silence. It takes separation. It takes God saying, "Let me work on you without interference," because what he is building in you is not fragile. It's not temporary. It's not shallow. It's not dependent on who stays or who leaves. He is building a strength rooted in him, immovable, unshakable, anchored. And here is the beautiful truth. Once God rebuilds your strength in isolation, no one will ever again be able to take from you what he has put inside you. No betrayal, no abandonment, no disappointment, no rejection will be able to shake you. Because the strength he builds in solitude is the kind of strength that lasts a lifetime. So if you're in that quiet place right now, if you feel hidden, forgotten, or set aside, don't misinterpret it. You're not being buried, you're being rebuilt. And the strength that will rise from this season will be a strength you never knew you had. And once God rebuilds that strength in you, once He shapes you into someone who no longer collapses under the weight of pressure or people, something remarkable begins to happen. When human support fails, divine support becomes unmistakably obvious. Because now that you've been rebuilt in the quiet, God starts showing you that He was the one holding you together the entire time. You just couldn't see it when you were leaning on everyone else. There comes a moment in every believer's journey when God steps forward and says, "No, let me show you what I can do without anyone else assisting me." And that moment usually arrives right after you've been stripped of every human hand you depended on. Not because God wants you to suffer, but because He wants you to recognize the source of your true strength. You see, as long as people are holding you up, you may think they are the reason you're still standing. But when those hands let go and you're still here, still breathing, still fighting, still pushing forward, that's when you realize someone greater has been carrying you all along. The absence of human support exposes the presence of divine support. And some of you are discovering this right now without even realizing it. You thought losing relationships would break you, but somehow you're more stable than you expected. You thought being left alone would crush you, but somehow you're still rising every morning with a strength you can't explain. You thought the betrayal would destroy you, but somehow the wound became a place where God poured His grace, His comfort, His wisdom, His power. Why? Because God steps in most visibly when everyone else steps out. There were moments you cried alone, but you felt a peace that didn't match your situation. Moments you had no one to talk to, but wisdom came to your mind in ways you couldn't explain. Moments you didn't know how to move forward, but a path opened where there was no path at all. That wasn't luck. That wasn't resilience. That was divine support. And the reason God allows human support to fail sometimes is because He wants to free you from the illusion that you need people more than you need Him. People may comfort you, but they cannot carry you. They may encourage you, but they cannot heal you. They may walk with you, but they cannot sustain you. Only God can do that. And when you finally see it, when you finally recognize that His presence is stronger, His support is surer, His help is closer than any human hand, you stop living in fear of who stays and who leaves. You stop feeling threatened by changes in people. You stop panicking when someone walks away, because you now know the truth. People may fail you, but God never will. People may abandon you, but God remains. People may forget you, but God cannot. And once you've tasted the strength that comes from divine support, you become someone who walks differently. You live with a confidence not rooted in compliments, but in certainty, a stability not rooted in relationships, but in revelation, a courage not rooted in applause, but in God's unfailing presence. So if you're in that place where human support is failing, don't fear it. Don't fight it. Don't resent it. Lift your eyes, because you are about to see the hand of God in a way you could not have seen while leaning on anyone else. When human support fails, divine support becomes undeniable. And it's precisely when that divine support becomes undeniable, when you start realizing that God has been the one carrying you through every valley, that you begin to understand something even deeper. Your lowest valley is often God's highest classroom, because God does not waste pain, does not overlook tears, does not ignore brokenness. Instead, He transforms your valley into a place of teaching, molding, sharpening, and awakening you to truths you would have overlooked on any mountain. You may not like the valley you're walking through. You may not understand it. You may even wish you could escape it. But hear me, the valley is where God teaches lessons that elevate your entire life. The valley is where He uncovers parts of your character that need healing, where He uproots old patterns that held you back, where He confronts fears you've avoided, and where He pours wisdom into you like a stream running through quiet ground. There are things you can only learn in low places. When you're in the valley, distractions vanish, pride melts. The noise of other voices fades. You're not surrounded by applause or comfort or convenience, so your heart becomes more attentive, your spirit becomes more receptive, and your faith becomes more sensitive to the voice of God. And suddenly, the very place you wanted to escape becomes the place where revelation flows like never before. In the valley, God teaches you who you really are. He shows you the strength you didn't know you had. He shows you the resilience you never recognized. He shows you the courage you never believed was in you. And he also reveals who he really is. He shows you his faithfulness when everything else fails. He shows you his closeness when everyone else leaves. He shows you his power when you feel powerless. He shows you his wisdom when you feel lost. Some of the greatest men and women in Scripture learned their most important lessons in the valley. David learned courage facing a giant in a valley. Joseph learned integrity in the valley of false accusation and prison. Elijah learned God's whisper in the valley of discouragement. Jesus himself walked through the valley of Gethsemane before rising in glory. The valley is not punishment, it's preparation. And the reason God often teaches in valleys is because he knows mountaintops can distract you, but valleys will shape you. You grow deeper roots in low places than you ever do on high peaks. You develop deeper trust and stillness than you ever do in celebration. You come to know God more intimately in heartbreak than you ever do in comfort. So if you're walking through a valley right now, if life feels low, heavy, or dark, don't misinterpret where you are. Don't assume God has forgotten you. Don't conclude that the valley is a sign of his absence. The valley may actually be the clearest sign that he is working on you, teaching you, refining you for something higher than what you've known before. You may feel like the valley is lowering you, but in reality, it's lifting you. You may feel like you're being pressed down, but you're being prepared. You may feel like you've been pushed into darkness, but you're being led into revelation. Because in God's classroom, the lowest place is often the place where the greatest lessons are taught. And when you come out of this valley, and you'll walk out wiser, stronger, deeper, clearer, and more anchored than you've ever been in your life. And once you begin to recognize the valley as God's classroom, once you see how he shapes, molds, and strengthens you in the lowest places, then you can finally understand why he often brings you into seasons of quiet. Because God does his deepest work in your quietest seasons. Not when you're surrounded by activity, not when life is loud and demanding, but when everything slows down, when the noise dies out, when the distractions fade, and all that remains is you and the gentle whisper of his presence. There is a kind of spiritual surgery that can only happen in silence. Some of you are in that silent season right now, and it terrifies you. You're used to motion. You're used to noise. You're used to being needed, being busy, being surrounded. And suddenly, everything has slowed, everything has stilled, everything feels strangely quiet. You're wondering if something is wrong, wondering if God has stepped back, wondering if life has lost its rhythm. But hear me, nothing is wrong. God is simply doing a deeper work. Silence is not the absence of God, it is the environment where he works with precision. When God wants to deal with hidden wounds, he brings stillness. When he wants to touch broken places that no one knows about, he quiets the world around you. When he wants to restore strength that exhaustion has drained, he pulls you away from the chaos, not to isolate you, but to heal you. In quiet seasons, God speaks differently. He doesn't shout. He doesn't thunder. He whispers. And that whisper carries truths you would have missed in the noise. It's in the quiet that he reminds you who you are. It's in the quiet that he confronts the lies you began believing about yourself. It's in the quiet that he comforts your heart in ways people never could. It's in the quiet that he reveals direction, strategy, purpose, and clarity. Noise distracts you from God. Silence positions you for God. And some of you never realized that the reason God allowed certain things to slow down, allowed certain plans to pause, allowed certain relationships to fade, allowed certain opportunities to step back was because he was trying to get you to stop long enough for him to deal with you. Because God refuses to build something new on top of something broken. So he invites you into quiet seasons to repair foundations that life has cracked. Foundations of identity, foundations of trust, foundations of faith, foundations of purpose, and yes, foundations of hope that have been shaken by disappointment after disappointment. And here's the beauty of it in the quiet. God doesn't just fix what was damaged. He strengthens what remains. He restores what was fading. He breathes fresh life into what was discouraged. He pours peace into places where anxiety once lived. He fills your spirit with strength that doesn't come from adrenaline, ambition, or people, but from Him alone. So don't despise the stillness you're in. Don't rush out of the quiet. Don't try to fill the silence with noise because you're uncomfortable. Allow God to complete the deep work He is doing, because when He finishes what He is shaping in these silent seasons, you will walk out with a strength that is calm, with a peace that is unshakable, and with a clarity that noise could never have given you. God does His deepest work when life becomes quiet enough for you to hear Him. And once God has done that deep work in the quiet, once He has healed what was wounded, restored what was weakened, rebuilt what was broken, something extraordinary begins to rise inside you. A realization, a revelation, a holy awareness that only emerges after the noise has settled and the silence has shaped you. You begin to understand that a man who is only God finally learns who God truly is. Because as long as you have substitutes, you will never fully see the source. As long as you have backups, you will never fully rely on the provider. As long as you have people to run to, you will never fully run to Him. But when God becomes your only answer, you start discovering sides of Him you never knew existed. When you have no one else to comfort you, you learn He is the comforter. When you have no one else to guide you, you learn He is the shepherd. When you have no one else to fight for you, you learn He is the defender. When you have no one else to depend on, you learn He is your rock, your fortress, your refuge, your strength. This revelation does not come through sermons alone. It does not come through someone else's testimony. It comes when life pushes you into places where God is no longer optional. He is essential. It's in that moment when you stand in the quiet aftermath of loss, separation, disappointment, or isolation that you start to see God in ways you never saw Him before. You begin to understand that He is not just a distant figure in heaven. He is the one who steps into your loneliness, sits beside you in the silence, and holds you when everything else lets go. And something changes inside you. Your prayers change, your worship changes, your perspective changes. Your faith deepens in ways that cannot be undone. Because once you have encountered God as your only support, your only source of strength, your only place of peace, you cannot go back to depending on people the way you once did. You cannot return to shallow faith. You cannot return to fragile hope. You cannot return to a life built on shaky foundations. A man who has only God becomes a man who finally sees God, and it's in this moment that faith stops being theory and becomes experience. God stops being a concept and becomes your lifeline. His presence stops being something you talk about and becomes something you rely on.
Yeah.
His word stops being something you read occasionally and becomes the very breath that sustains you. Because when you have nothing left but God, you discover that God is everything. And the beautiful thing is this: once you discover who He truly is in that deep place, in that quiet place, in that stripped down season where only He remains, you will never again be intimidated by loss, abandonment, or isolation. Because you have learned that if God is all you have, you still have more than enough. So when life narrows your world to just you and God, don't resist it, don't fear it, don't resent it. Because in that narrow place, in that sacred solitude, God reveals Himself not as a distant deity, but as the one who has been waiting to show you the fullness of His heart. A man who has only God is a man who finally knows God. And once a man finally knows God, once he has walked through the silence, endured the valley, felt the loss, embraced the rebuilding, and discovered the one who never leaves, then something powerful and unmistakable begins to rise inside him. A divine empowerment that prepares him to walk into his purpose with a strength no human hand ever gave him. Because when God becomes your only anchor, he also becomes your greatest assignment. When he becomes your only refuge, he becomes your marching orders. When he becomes your only source, he becomes the one who sends you out filled, fueled, and fortified. There comes a moment after the loneliness, after the lessons, after the quiet, that God begins to stir something in your spirit. A sense that everything you walked through was not just for survival, it was for preparation. Preparation for impact, preparation for destiny, preparation for the calling he placed on your life long before you ever felt abandoned, forgotten, or alone. And hear me, the man who has only God becomes unstoppable, not because he is strong, but because the strength inside him is not his own. When you've been held by God in your lowest season, you walk differently in your next season. When you've been carried by his hand, you stand taller in your purpose. When you've been taught by his whisper, you speak with clarity no one else can imitate. People who knew you before won't understand the new fire burning inside you. They'll see the boldness, but not the breaking that produced it. They'll see the confidence, but not the valley that shaped it. They'll see the wisdom, but not the silence that carved it. Because God does not empower empty vessels. He empowers surrendered ones. And the man who has lost everything but God is the most surrendered man of all. In that surrendered place, God begins to pour into you ideas, vision, strategy, purpose, clarity, things you could not have received while your life was crowded with opinions, distractions, and noise. He begins to ignite passions that had been buried under years of doubt or discouragement. He begins to awaken gifts you didn't even know you carried. He begins to open doors you once thought were permanently closed. And here's the beauty: you don't walk through those doors with fear anymore. You walk through them empowered. You walk through them steady. You walk through them knowing that the one who walked with you in the valley will walk with you on the mountain. This final stage, this divine empowerment is not flashy. It's not loud. It's not the kind of strength the world applauds. It's deeper. It's sacred. It's the quiet, unwavering assurance that God is with you, God is in you, and God is going before you. And when you live with that assurance, nothing intimidates you anymore. Not lack, not loneliness, not rejection, not uncertainty, not even the unknown. Because the unknown becomes a place where you expect God to move. The future becomes a place where you expect God to lead. Your calling becomes a place where you expect God to show his power. This is the power of reaching that place where you have no one but God. You come out of that season with a strength not built by applause, not built by people, not built by comfort, but built by God himself. And when God builds a man, the world cannot break him.